Jack Horner would shoot a puppy without blinking, Scar kills his brother for a throne, and Judge Frollo tried to wipe out every gypsy in Paris. These are psychopaths who work. But when King Magnifico suddenly turns into a monster, no one cares. This is because there are some specific things you need to write a true psychopathic villain. But a lot of writers don't know this. They think just being crazy and vicious means psychopathic, whereas that is false. So what is the difference? The first thing you need to know about writing a psychopath is that not every bad guy is one. Studies show that while there are a lot of bad people in the world, only a handful are psychopaths. Similarly, while we've seen a lot of terrifying villains from Disney, DreamWorks, or other studios, only a few of them have truly been psychopathic. In fact, some of the craziest villains, such as Jinx in Arcane and Azula in Avatar, despite all the devilish atrocities they committed, are not psychopaths, and we will tell you why soon. But first, who is a psychopath?
You're not gonna shoot a puppy, are you?
Yeah, in the face. Why?
Jack Horner is the perfect way to define a psychopath, which is any person who has an egocentric and antisocial personality marked by a lack of remorse for one's actions, an absence of empathy for others, and often criminal tendencies. Jack fits this perfectly. But the problem is that this definition is too basic. It leaves you thinking any cruel or selfish villain qualifies, and that's why so many movie fans and even writers misuse the word. This is why Canadian psychologist Robert Hare came up with a checklist of 20 traits that help define a psychopath. To qualify, someone has to score 30 out of 40. Jack scores over 30, cementing himself as a true psychopath. Additionally, it also helps to picture psychopathy as a spectrum. On one end, you have high-functioning psychopaths, the ones who can smile, blend into society, and plan their cruelty with precision. Judge Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame is such psychopath. But on the other end are the low-functioning types, like Jack Horner, who don't bother hiding it. They're impulsive, reckless, and wear their cruelty on their sleeves. Both lack empathy. The difference is in how they show it. And just to clear up a common mix-up, psychopaths aren't the same as psychotic people. Psychosis is about losing touch with reality, including hallucinations, delusions, and hearing voices, whereas psychopaths know exactly what they're doing. They know right from wrong, they just don't care. This is why Azula and Jinx don't count as psychopaths. Azula lies, manipulates, and terrifies everyone around her. But at her core, she's desperate for her father's approval and terrified of her mother's rejection.
You think I'm a monster?
I think you're confused. All your life you've used fear to control people.
Her breakdown at the end of Avatar shows someone drowning in fear and emotion. Jinx in Arcane is the same way. Her violence comes from trauma and instability. Jack, on the other hand, is not necessarily haunted by trauma. Sure, he had the magic puppet take away his attention for one moment when he was young, but is that really traumatic enough? Let me know what you think. He lacks any further trauma, like a desperate desire for his father's approval or the need to be loved. His drive is far simpler: selfishness and greed. He wants every magical object he can get his hands on, because taking them makes him feel powerful. That hunger to own everything, to control everyone, is what drives him, and it's why he is a true psychopath and Azula is not. The same can be said about Jinx from Arcane. Jinx is characterized by her extreme emotional volatility, impulsive behavior, and instability, making her a much better fit for borderline personality disorder or sociopathy. But as far as being psychopathic is concerned, she is not. Don't get it twisted, we are not in any way criticizing Jinx and Azula. They are epic villains written to perfection. However, as far as psychopathy is concerned, they are not there yet. And this was the intention of the writers because they fit the story that way. Anyway, now that you know who a psychopath is versus who isn't, it's time to look at textbook examples that teach us exactly how to write a truly psychopathic villain. Take Jack Horner. From the moment he walks on screen, he's framed as someone who lacks empathy and also takes joy in doing terrible things. The man is introduced with his thumb permanently stained from dipping pies. It is funny, yes, but it signifies a person who is gluttonous, selfish, and leaves a mess behind without a care in the world. When the Serpent Sisters call him Little Jack, you can see the wound to his pride instantly.
It wasn't a fairy tale. It was only a nursery rhyme.
He snaps because everything about Jack is built on resentment, one that started early. As a child, he was overshadowed by Pinocchio, a wooden puppet that stole his spotlight. Instead of trying to be better, Little Jack was visibly bitter.
What's impressive? I've been a boy the whole time!
That bitterness grew into a lifelong obsession to outshine everyone else by collecting every magical item in the world. And unlike so many villains who are humanized by tragedy or softened by a final act of redemption, Jack gets worse as the story goes on. He kills his own men without hesitation. He skewers Goldilocks and the Three Bears with Excalibur and laughs in delight at their suffering. He treats his henchmen like props, leaning on their heads as furniture or blasting them with unicorn horns for sport. The fact that he enjoys all of it makes him a true psychopath. Even his final moment cements this.
What did I do to deserve this? I mean, what specifically?
It is a comical thing to say, but it also shows someone who still wasn't ready to take responsibility for his actions and repent. Ironically, the thumbs down he gave as he sank down the wishing star is a parody of the thumbs up Arnold Schwarzenegger's character the T-800 gave in Terminator 2. However, while the thumbs up represented how the T-800 has developed feelings throughout the movie, Jack's thumbs down indicated the opposite. He didn't grow any conscience in the end, and he is totally okay with that. Judge Frollo is cut from the same cloth, though his brand of psychopathy wears a different mask. While Jack flaunts his monstrosity, Frollo cloaks his in righteousness.
You know I am a righteous man.
From the first scene when he kills a woman on the cathedral steps and nearly drowns her baby, he believes himself justified. He calls it cleansing Paris of sin. That's the genius of Frollo. He doesn't see himself as evil. Dude actually thinks he is chosen, and that's what makes him terrifying. Frollo embodies the high-functioning psychopath. He's calculating, intelligent, and completely aware of how to manipulate appearances. In public, he speaks of duty and righteousness, but in private, he lusts after Esmeralda with such intensity that he blames her for his own desire. In the famous Hellfire song, he sings about being consumed by lust, but even in his confession, he twists the blame outward.
It's not my fault. I'm not to blame.
A true psychopath doesn't take responsibility, and Frollo never does. But what makes him so effective on screen is in the escalation of his threat. At first, he's simply cruel to Quasimodo, raising him in isolation and convincing him he's a monster. But as the story continues, his obsession with Esmeralda grows darker. He burns Paris to the ground searching for her, lighting homes on fire with families still inside. His lack of empathy widens from personal cruelty to citywide devastation. And when he finally corners Esmeralda, offering her a choice between himself and death, it is the ultimate expression of his own psychopathy. To him, love is ownership, and when he can't own her, he'd rather destroy her. Even at the very end, with his life still in danger, he clings to his self-righteousness, quoting the scriptures like a holy man.
And he shall smite the wicked, plunge them into the fiery pit.
Except that he was the one who ended up inside the fiery pit, without remorse or repentance. What ties Jack and Frollo together, despite their different tones, is their lack of humanity. Jack represents the openly sadistic psychopath, the kind who kills for sport and laughs at the pain of others. Frollo represents the high-functioning psychopath, the kind who cloaks evil in charm and justification, manipulating the world while remaining utterly hollow inside. Both grow more dangerous the longer they remain on screen, and neither of them offers redemption, because they're not designed to. But here's what's crazy. Just knowing how to write a psychopath is not enough. You also need to know how not to write one to avoid mistakes that ruin what works. There are times when writers want so badly to create a psychopathic villain that they end up doing the exact opposite. King Magnifico in Wish is one of those cases. On the surface, he should have been terrifying. He's the ruler of a kingdom, hoarding the dreams of his people, wielding the kind of authority that could make him feel godlike. That setup alone could have produced a chilling, manipulative, high-functioning psychopath. Instead, the film undermines him at every turn, softening him with choices that strip away his menace. The biggest misstep was giving Magnifico a backstory that framed his villainy as the product of trauma. The film tells us that he once lost everything to dark forces, and that's why he clings to power so obsessively. This kind of writing might work for a sympathetic anti-hero, but it kills the authenticity of a psychopath. Psychopaths don't need childhood trauma to justify their cruelty when their lack of empathy is already in default mode. By rooting Magnifico's hunger for control in a wound from his past, the film makes him less frightening and more pitiable. He's evil because the world hurt him, and now he lashes out. That's just a man broken by fear. When you combine that weak backstory with the rushed speed of his descent, the result is even weaker. One minute, he's a strict but seemingly protective king. The next, he's a dark magic tyrant. The escalation is too sharp, too sudden, and doesn't match the psychology the movie tries to sell.
I decide what everyone deserves.
It feels less like a man revealing his true colors and more like a script flipping a switch because the story needed a villain. Magnifico never convinces us that he's the kind of monster who would have risen with or without Asha's challenge. Contrast that with Scar from The Lion King. The original Scar is one of Disney's most perfect psychopaths. He doesn't need a backstory to justify his cruelty, because his actions already define him. From the very beginning, we see his jealousy, his manipulation, and his complete absence of empathy. He uses charm when it benefits him, tricking Simba into danger. He exploits the hyenas, promising them food and security while caring nothing for their survival. He schemes in the shadows, waiting for the perfect chance to betray Mufasa. And when that moment comes, he murders him without hesitation. Dude literally throws his own brother to his death. There's no external trauma driving him, no sympathetic excuse. He is who he is. Selfish, manipulative, and ruthless. His psychopathy is baked into his character. But then came the remake, and Scar was softened with, you guessed it, a backstory. In the live-action version, his bitterness is framed around being rejected, his villainy born from humiliation and past conflict. That shift turns him from a psychopath into a trauma-driven antagonist. Instead of a character who embodies pure callousness, he becomes another case of the world breaking someone until they turn cruel. And here's the problem. Trauma-based villainy is not psychopathic. Simple. This is the exact same trap Magnifico falls into. His backstory tells us why he clings to power, and by doing so, the movie takes away the raw terror of a man who would have done these things anyway. The lesson here is clear. When you try to make a psychopath more sympathetic by giving them trauma, you create weakness. Magnifico could have been a great villain if the film had leaned into his control from the beginning. Imagine if his kingdom wasn't just strict, but quietly suffocating, with every citizen stripped of their dreams because he deliberately locked them away. Imagine if this charm was only a mask, a way of presenting himself as benevolent while taking pleasure in the knowledge that no one had the power to defy him. Asha's defiance would then expose him, not create him. His use of dark magic would feel inevitable, rather than sudden. His downfall would feel earned, the collapse of a man who was always a monster. Instead of a man, the story forced into darkness. This is why Scar in the original film still stands as the gold standard amongst Judge Frollo and Jack Horner. They show how to write a psychopath without excuses, without pity, without a forced descent. So now that you know who a psychopath is versus who is not, how do you translate this into your writing in a way that your villain becomes unforgettable? Well, the first thing you need to do is the same thing that makes any other character work. Give them motivation. You can have a psychopath be charming, manipulative, and ruthless, but if we don't understand what they're after, then all we're watching is empty cruelty. While a regular villain might want money for comfort or revenge for love lost, a psychopath's motivation is almost always driven by two core values: hedonism and power. Hedonism for a psychopath has little to do with just food or sex, but the extreme desire for pleasurable things like control, status, and the thrill of the chase or the kill. Power, on the other hand, is how they display that pleasure. It shows up in their image, their title, their wealth, and the way they stand above everyone else. At the core, though, it all comes down to selfishness. Psychopaths want material gain and control because, in their eyes, that's the only thing that matters. For Judge Frollo, his ultimate motivation is to purge a city he sees as morally corrupt. Jack wants all the magic in the world, while Scar wants to be king over the Pride Lands. This motivation subsequently drives the psychopath's failure to accept responsibility. Therefore, they would blame every horrific action they commit on others and never themselves.
I am guiltless. She ran, I pursued.
This externalizing of blame is the bedrock of their character, ensuring they never suffer the terrible effects of remorse or guilt. But here's another thing you need to remember. No backstory, or at least don't write a pathetic one. Jack Horner might have had a brief backstory, but even in it, we meet a child who is already riddled with jealousy and entitlement. He wasn't traumatized in any way. In fact, he had a perfect childhood, one where his parents gave him everything, including a mansion and a thriving baking business.
Useless crap like that.
Yet he still ended up as a psychopath, and that's the ticket right there. To write a psychopath, embrace the idea that their coldness is simply who they are. Another thing you need to write a psychopath is by noting their ability to employ superficial charm and fake empathy, because psychopaths are often social chameleons who study human emotion the way an actor studies a script. They know what people expect, and they deliver it to lower people's guard. A psychopath will appear kind and calculated because they understand this is the most efficient way to achieve their selfish goals. This is why their relationships are never genuine, but entirely transactional. For Frollo, his so-called relationship with Quasimodo is to keep the boy alive only because it feeds his piety and provides him with a controllable enslaved servant. But here's where you need to be careful when writing a psychopath. You see, since these guys are only imitating empathy, they are bound to make mistakes, especially under pressure. Hence, you must include parts where they crack or where the mask slips. Frollo initially acts like he is not interested in Esmeralda since she's a gypsy. However, when he finally gets alone with her inside the church, he makes a mistake by groping her and sniffing her hair. Esmeralda picks up on this and calls him out. But of course, the judge doesn't admit it.
Typical of your kind to twist the true cloud the mind with unholy thoughts.
Another thing to remember is the escalation of threats. A poorly written psychopath jumps straight to mass murder. A brilliant one starts small, using their manipulation and cunning to gradually escalate their threat, validating their entire buildup. The story must show that their criminal versatility is not random, but an expanding set of tools used to achieve their singular, selfish purpose. Scar is the perfect example. At first, he hides his cruelty under wit and sarcasm, mocking Simba and manipulating him with charm. Then, he escalates, plotting Mufasa's death and manipulating Simba into exile. By the time he seizes the throne, his mask has fallen, and he rules with indifference and malice, letting the Pride Lands rot. Each stage strips away more of his disguise, until we see him for what he really is, a predator who is always willing to betray his own blood to satisfy his hunger for power. If you follow these tips, you will have successfully taken a psychopath from a checklist of traits to an unforgettable villain. But if you want to know the exact way to write any character at all, especially in terms of how they develop through a story, this video will guide you.